Hey everyone, and welcome to this storytelling masterclass. If you're an aspiring writer, or honestly, just someone who absolutely loves dissecting a really great plot, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're going to unpack the absolute secret sauce of storytelling together, and that is conflict. Seriously, it's the engine that drives character growth. Without it, well, your protagonist goes absolutely nowhere. So in this explainer, we're exploring the 7 pillars of narrative conflict, and we'll be comparing some iconic international examples side by side with brilliant local Filipino masterpieces. Let's dive in. To help you identify these conflicts in your own reading and writing, we're going to divide our syllabus today into 2 main categories: the battle within and outside forces. All right, let's jump right into section 1, exploring the most intimate scale of narrative tension, the battle within. First up is man versus self. Now, this is actually the only type of internal conflict we're going to cover, but do not underestimate it. It is deeply, deeply powerful because it literally forces characters to face their own moral dilemmas. This is where the absolute most profound character growth happens, you know? The protagonist really has to wrestle with their own emotions, their doubts, and their conflicting desires before they can ever even hope to face the outside world. The core Socratic question for man versus self boils down to this: what is the right choice, and do I have the strength to make it? It forces the protagonist to look in the mirror and confront their own limitations. For all you writers out there, forcing your characters to answer this specific question is exactly what transforms a flat caricature into a living, breathing, three-dimensional human being.
Seeing this in practice is just fascinating. Notice how Walter White's internal battle with his massive, growing ego in Breaking Bad perfectly mirrors General Antonio Luna's struggle with his own explosive temper in the film General Luna. In both of these cases, their internal flaws constantly get in the way of their sheer brilliance. And the visual cues representing these internal stakes are incredible to watch. You'll see these subtle facial twitches, these long moments of isolated silence, or literally the physical sweat of a character battling their own worst instincts.
Okay, moving right along to section 2, let's see how this builds when we introduce outside forces. We're starting this section with man versus man. This is the absolute classic external struggle. It pits 2 distinct entities against one another in a direct, highly visual clash of opposing goals. Honestly, it's the protagonist versus the antagonist in its purest, most basic form. So the crucial question here is pretty straightforward. How do I defeat the person standing in my way? But a quick tip, remember that this isn't always about physical defeat. Sometimes it's much deeper. It's about overcoming opposing ideologies, clashing personalities, or deeply rooted personal rivalries. Let's compare 2 absolute classics to see how this works. Whether it's the intense intellectual chess match between Sherlock Holmes and Professor Moriarty, or the deeply systemic, incredibly bitter personal rivalry between Crisostomo Ibarra and Padre Damaso in José Rizal's Noli Me Tangere, the visual cues for these external stakes are perfectly clear. You have these glaring standoffs, incredibly tense dialogues, and a very tangible opposition between 2 forces demanding victory. Now, what happens when the conflict scales up dramatically? That brings us to man versus society. Here, the protagonist isn't just fighting a single antagonist. They're up against an entire oppressive system, a government or a community. It's the ultimate story of the individual fighting the collective. This kind of narrative is driven by one major question: how do I survive or change a system that completely rejects who I am? It really challenges the character to fight for acceptance or justice or frankly just basic survival against institutional power. And talk about character growth. This forces massive change because the protagonist basically has to become either a leader or a martyr. Just look at how brilliantly this plays out in fiction. The tyrannical capital in the Hunger Games and the incredibly violent military regime during martial law in Luis Hari Bautista's Decada 70 both perfectly illustrate how characters grow when resisting authoritarian rule. In both of these stories, the protagonists evolve from everyday people who are just trying to protect their immediate families into massive symbols of larger societal resistance. Next up, we look at pure, primal survival with man versus nature. Here, the antagonist is an unfeeling, completely unpredictable, and harsh environment. The scary part? The antagonist doesn't even hate the protagonist. It just exists, and it happens to be deadly. So the fundamental question is stripped down to this: how do I stay alive in this harsh environment? This type of conflict completely removes all the societal concerns, the politics, the interpersonal drama, and it focuses the narrative purely on human endurance, ingenuity, and just basic survival against overwhelming odds.
The raw endurance required here is just staggering. Take Mark Watney's complete scientific isolation on a barren planet in The Martian and put it side by side with the devastating grief and environmental ruin faced by the survivors of Super Typhoon Yolanda in the film Takleb. Both of these showcase incredible, grueling resilience. It is just a powerful testament to the human spirit refusing to be extinguished by forces vastly larger than itself.
But as society advances, our antagonists advance right along with it. Man versus technology introduces conflicts born entirely from our own scientific ambition and our digital creations. This pillar brings up some very real existential dread. The big question is, have our own creations outsmarted or trapped us? It asks the characters to confront the horrifying, unintended consequences of the exact tools they built to make their own lives easier or safer. And here is an incredible takeaway for you writers. Blending conflict types is exactly how you create the most complex, modern stories. We see this with the rogue AI, Skynet, and the Terminator, of course. But look at the Filipino action film, Buy Bust. The anti-drug squad gets trapped in this labyrinth-like slum, not just because of the people they're fighting, but because their own technology, their mapping, and their communication lines are jammed and actively weaponized against them. It's a completely brilliant blend of man versus society and man versus technology. Moving entirely beyond science now, we enter the realm of the unknown. In Man vs. Supernatural, characters face entities that completely defy human logic. The core question they have to answer is, how do I fight something that defies the very laws of science? Whether it's defeating the Demogorgon in Stranger Things, or navigating the incredibly gritty Manila underworld in the graphic novel Trees, the characters are forced to adapt to impossible rules. The character growth here doesn't come from getting stronger. It comes from expanding their worldview, accepting the impossible, and somehow finding courage in the face of absolute, terrifying mystery. Finally, we reach the grandest, most existential conflict type of them all, man versus fate or God. In this pillar, the antagonist is inescapable destiny itself. The question here really makes you pause. Can I truly change my destiny, or am I just a puppet? Slowing down to ponder this heavy, philosophical question highlights the ultimate existential dread a character has to conquer. They have to beat that dread to find their own agency and define their own path. It's really fascinating to see how this builds across eras. Contrast the literal curses from spiteful gods in ancient myths, like Oedipus and Hercules, with the highly grounded, inescapable social destiny we see in modern Filipino realities. For example, in the film Caregiver, Sarah deals with the harsh reality of her social fate. She's forced to shift from a respected teacher in the Philippines to a caregiver in London, simply to provide a future for her family. It's a very modern, deeply grounded take on fighting a destiny that feels entirely pre-written by economics and society. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Here is your ultimate cheat sheet summarizing all 7 pillars of conflict and their core questions. Take a good mental snapshot of this. Now, to wrap up our session, let's do a quick brainstorming exercise together. I'm going to give you 3 writing prompts to apply these rules. Prompt 1. A character obsessed with their own digital legacy, that's man versus self, gets locked out of their life by a glitching smart home, that's man versus tech. Prompt 2. A deeply traditional community, man versus society, is suddenly forced to abandon their ancestral island due to rising sea levels, man versus nature. Or Prompt 3. A character believes they are prophesied to save the world, man versus fate, but the person standing in their way is their own cynical twin, man versus man. Do you see how blending these pillars creates instant plot magic? So which of these conflicts will you force your own characters into next? Keep writing, keep exploring, and I'll catch you in our next explainer.